Hello again. So, it is time for another one of these. I'm sorry I didn't do one yesterday. I was not feeling my best. I went to bed very early and it was lovely. So, I'm into Mark now and finished the rest of Matthew, but there was a story that I really wanted to cover in Matthew that I love. And it's one that, as a historian of religion and a historian of the Near East, I approach differently than a lot of theologians do. And first things first, I'm going to disagree with James E. Talmage and like seminary manuals and stuff because there's important things. So there's the parable of the wedding of the king's son in Matthew 22. You probably know the parable. Just go over it. The kingdom of heaven is like unto a certain king which made a wedding feast for one of his sons. And he sent forth the servants to call them that as were bidden. So, in a nutshell, king's son gets married and he throws the big party. Sorry, my nose is itching. And everyone's invited. All the who's who, the it crowd. My mental picture for this is, of course, the Lifestyles of the Rich and Magical with the genie from the second Aladdin movie. What is it? Return of Jafar? Whatever you know. And so King throws a big party, but no one comes. And he sends out his servants to go see, like, why did people not come? And then that, of course, reminds me of the Mary Poppins musical, but that's a separate issue too. So the people who are invited blow off the servants. Some of them like torture the servants, torment the servants, make fun of them. And the king gets really ticked, and he like goes and kills all the people who he invited to the party who refused to come, which is annoying. Then saith he to his servants, the wedding is ready, but them which were bidden were not worthy. Go ye therefore out into the highways and the hedges, and they just go and they scour and they gather up as many people as they can, and they bring them to the wedding. And it's a really cool story, and it kind of ties into the parable, the other parable of the wedding in Luke, which we'll get to when we get to Luke. So, when the king came in to see the guests, this is verse 11, he saw there was a man which had not on a wedding garment. Now, this is where the theologians and the historians get different. Starting with Augustine, back in the 4th or 5th century, whenever Augustine was, 6th century? I don't remember anymore. That's really not good. Anyway, Augustine started the idea that has no historical evidence that the king must have provided a garment for all these people. In other words, the people are getting whatever this wedding garment is because the king's given it to them and he knows they're pulled off the streets. And that's been kind of like the accepted knowledge since the time of Augustine. But as far as anyone can tell, but most people don't agree with anything else Augustine says about this, except for that obviously the king must have provided something because otherwise it would be like really unfair. And it's really funny that the James E. Talmage response actually kind of talks about it in that sense too, that we know this must have done, but everybody says because it's the common custom. This is where the historian comes in. Not the common custom. We don't have evidence that the hosts of parties would provide the appropriate attire for this. Okay, so with that in mind, let's look at the next couple verses. And when the king came in to see the guests, he saw there a man which had not on a wedding garment. And he saith unto him, Friend, how camest thou in hither not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, Bind him hand and foot and take him away, and cast him into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, king comes to check out the guests. He sees there's a guy who's not wearing the wedding garment, whatever the wedding garment is. He says, How did you get in here without a wedding garment? And this is where people say, well, obviously the king must have provided things. And James E. Talmage's response is that this man probably snuck in through a different way. He was one of the actual invited guests. It doesn't do it for me. I mean, I like that, and I appreciate that, and that could be right. I'm not saying that I'm right. But the way I look at that is by verse 14. For many are called, but few are chosen. If we're going to put in many are called, but few are chosen right after this, then that means this guy did not sneak in. He was called to the wedding. He was invited. He came in the right way, but he wasn't found dressed the right way, even though he thought he was doing the right things. And I think that for me is more poignant, that this is somebody who thought he was doing the right things, who at least, because he's speechless, right? He showed up. He got dragged in off the street. He has every reason to not be in his best apparel, but he doesn't have a defense for himself. But even more than that, it makes it seem to me that even though all these other people were just sent out into the highway and gathered together as many as they could, these people who were gathered in thought that they needed to change. And they didn't just come into the wedding feast in what they were dragged in off the streets. That's how I look at it, that this guy, for whatever reason, this one who's not in the wedding garment, didn't make the change. And to me that matters, because he was called. He thought he was chosen, but he didn't do the things that all the other guests did. And this isn't going into the worst or important. No, it's about recognizing the importance of what it is that you're doing and recognizing the importance of where you are. This guy's getting invited to the king's feast, and he's not dressing up for it. Even if you're the poorest beggar on the street, you could do something a little nicer to go and have dinner with the king. And that reminds me that in my life, I get to have dinner with the king every Sunday through the sacrament and communion. I get to hopefully have dinner with the king for the rest of eternity. But I have to make the change myself. It is up to me whether or not I do what is required of me. And I can try and go along my own way, but I should probably change to do it God's way.